This presentation is meant to offer the perspective of individuals working with older person experiencing homelessness on what supports and challenges aging in the right place for this population. As we mentioned earlier in the symposium, the Aging in the Right Place research project relies on many data collection tools. For this presentation, we will focus on the interviews we conduct with service providers of the promising practice chosen in Montreal. This practice is la traversée, which means in French a passage, a crossing, a transit. However, la traversée is a long-term housing resource that has been developed to respond to the needs of older persons experiencing homelessness. It takes the form of a rooming house for older adults that offers 14 rooms in a community environment, psychosocial follow-up, and some instrumental support like 2 meals per day and access to laundry. At the beginning of 2021, we conducted 5 semi-structured online interviews with service providers. This kind of interview allowed us to explore many areas of the provider's perspective on the promising practice they work at. We will be guided through this presentation by a narrated excerpt from the verbatim of these interviews. So first, what do our interviews with service providers from this particular promising practice tell us about what seems to promote aging in the right place for this population in general?
We have to be patient. We have to be caring. We have to not take things personally. Because it's a clientele that is, well, actually, there's all kinds of problems, difficulties. It's a very open and caring approach with these guys that works very well, without judgment, and also with the patient that gives the person time to open up to us. Sometimes that, well, actually most of the time, that gives great results.
The providers felt that the psychosocial support and the help they provide is necessary and appreciated by the residents. They described the support as very human, personalized, and adapted to the rhythm of the elderly and the problems that can be experienced by people living in precarious housing conditions. Their availability appears to foster relationships that allow clients to tell their stories and help them more easily integrate into the community of residents. The providers understand their presence as reassuring, especially in their role as mediators when there are problems in the housing community. They see themselves as facilitating a cohabitation that could otherwise be difficult.
The strength is to give family to people who don't have family, or people who are alone. So the strength is the community spirit. It's giving a place to stay to people who are alone and then they get old.
Family, of course, does not only bring positive things, but it allows to anchor beyond a physical place and despite the difficulties. The resident seems to appreciate having a space of one's own in a common place. This is what seems to give value to a small room with relative comfort, since it prevents them from being totally alone. A loneliness that can be challenging to live, especially when combined with the isolation and stigma commonly experienced by people living with mental health and addiction issues. Community life, just like family life, also means more or less shared meals. The providers say that the meals are often the only opportunity for the residents to socialize. Meals are seen as an activity in itself that should not be underestimated. In this sense, the competency of the cook makes all the difference in the experience of the residents. This is perhaps a significant finding particular to this promising practice, where the cook contributes to transforming the community into a kind of family by the care given to the preparation of the meals, or attention to the differentiated needs of the residents, and the informal support she provides to those who come to confide in her. Staff describe her as the mother figure of the promising practice. Finally, community life involves rules and routine that providers observe as reassuring to the residents. They feel that the residents are not necessarily attached to the individuals they live with, but more to the rhythm of this shared living space. And now, what seems to challenge aging in the right place?
It's like a transition. To start aging in the right place is a great door. To start that process of aging in the right place, because that gives stability to people who have lost their stability. Then we can stabilize them and bring them to a better place.
This last excerpt could be seen as good practice, but it is challenging to the extent that despite the promising practice is officially referred to as a long-term housing resource, staff describes what appears to be a transitional housing resource with no official length of stay. So there seems to be a blurriness around what are the limits of the resource. So we were told of three main limits. First is the non-respect of the code of life. So the residents do not sign a lease. It is rather a service contract. So they commit to respect the life code and to participate into a psychosocial follow-up. But there seems to be an important reflection in the resident selection process. So this will rarely be the limit that forces relocation. There is also the limit of having too much autonomy, but too much according to whom? The providers who think that the residents could live in an apartment by their own. In these cases, individuals will be encouraged to move toward a better place. But again, better place according to whom? Because it's true that for some residents, the service costing 60% of their income is expensive and they could have an apartment of their own at that price. But for some of the residents, the stability they find at the promising practice is priceless. And finally, there is also the loss of autonomy that will bring a resident to the limit of having too little autonomy. And this is challenging because the resource welcomes older persons who experience homelessness, for whom we know aging is accelerated and health is fragile. So the stability they must have at their admission to the resource remains precarious. It is very foreseeable that a loss of autonomy will force relocation in the more or less near future. And moreover, there is a lot of uncertainty for the providers in regard to the protocols if there is a cognitive or physical health decline for a resident. They really question how far they can extend the support they provide, especially because extending the support implies a collaboration with the public services, and that unfortunately the transition out of the promising practice is often done in an emergency because of the difficulty to coordinate services with the public system. So while the providers try to anticipate the relocation of a resident in need of more services and will try upstream to reach out to the public system to prepare the transition, the admission to more supportive resource will often be delayed till the last minute when living in the rooming house become a treat to the person themselves and to the other member of the housing community. So one can easily imagine the stress related to these uncertainties that is experienced both by the staff and by the residents.
It's kind of a gray zone program because we're dealing with the elderly homeless clientele who are not physically or cognitively hypothecated enough, whatever, to be in a CHSLD. But we can't leave them in the shelters either. But they don't have the skills to be in an apartment anymore. So, well, they're really in kind of a gray zone.
So adding to the blurriness of the transition is the gray zone between services for aging individuals and services for those experiencing homelessness. So do some elements of a well-functioning resource for people experiencing homelessness may challenge aging in the right place. For example, interventions in homelessness focus on reintegration into the labor market and access to individual housing at a time when these individuals, even if they are sometimes young compared to elderly in general, are no longer able to work because of health concern and are sometimes no longer able to live alone in a safe manner. So the fear that the residents will become institutionalized through a dependence on the system comes up often in the discourse of the providers. However, this is not necessarily the case in situations where an aging population may require additional dependence on services due to their progressing fragility. And now, what could inspire us to improve existing services or ensure that we develop adequate services moving forward?
I work with this client according to the objectives that were defined at the beginning. I have difficulties with such and such elements. I would like to have some suggestions for an intervention. These discussions don't exist. When we're extremely lucky, we have a colleague who joins the team and we're able to have these discussions. But this colleague will not stay forever. They'll leave for other things.
So person-centered approach relies on humans adapting their practice moment by moment to the clients they work with. And this requires support. It is especially true when the clients present the characteristic described by the providers we interviewed. So mental health challenges, personality disorders, substance abuse issues, trauma. In addition, the caseload of each provider is diverse, and the training they receive focus on intervention with people experiencing homelessness, not on issues specifically related to aging. So offering adequate training and clinical supervision to the providers would not only promote best practices, but would also encourage preventative strategies for professional burnout linked to compassion fatigue. Ultimately, it could also have an impact on employee retention, limiting staff turnover that inevitably impacts the stability of the residents themselves.
So I think that it would be interesting to have more structures like that. Because it's true that, well, residences for the elderly are all very well. You have your own home, you have meals every day, and so on. But in reality, do these people mix with each other? Do they see someone on a daily basis? We also have the strength of they're not alone. We see them, we have contact with them.
Finally, the providers spoke of the need to professionalize the service in order to be able to maintain people in place as long as possible. But in order, for example, to hire a nurse, it is necessary to have more residents in the housing resource. So this brings up the problem of the delicate balance between increasing the services that are offered to residents versus changing the human scale structure inherent to a rooming house. So in the future design of housing resources that address the needs of older person experiencing homelessness, it seems essential to keep in mind the importance of the community spirit that comes from housing resources built on a human scale. Thank you very much for listening.